The Archdiocese of Chicago is a vibrant and diverse faith community. We celebrate our faith through worship, evangelization, and reaching out to the needy. Welcome to Catholic Chicago.
Good morning, and welcome to the Voice of Charity. I'm Katie Breedeman, and we thank you for joining us today. Recently, Sally Blount, President and CEO of Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Chicago, welcomed Kerry Robinson to the Windy City. Kerry is the new President and CEO of Catholic Charities USA, which is based in Alexandria, Virginia. While she was in town, Kerry Robinson had a powerful conversation with Cardinal Blase about the work of Catholic Charities in the United States and in the Archdiocese of Chicago. This discussion was moderated by Sally Blount, and it was held during an evening event at St. Joseph and Francis Xavier Parish in Wilmette. The topic discussed was Imagining Abundance, Faith, Hope, and Charity in Today's World. We'd like to share some of this important discussion with you.
Now, part of my job when we host an event is to make sure I don't miss the opportunity before we go into dialogue to do a little bit of public service about Catholic Charities. And so there are three things that we've put in front of you tonight that we hope you will take home with you that I want to talk to just a little bit. And the first is the most recent issue of Spirit magazine. And I love the quote from Thomas Merton that is just inside the front cover. Do not be discouraged. The Holy Spirit is not asleep. And it feels especially poignant since it is Pentecost Sunday coming. And I think in this day, when every day we open up the news, in this era, when there seems to be just one more depressing thing after the other, I frequently now repeat this to myself, is the Holy Spirit is not asleep, and that is where we get our hope, and that is where we get our faith, and our willingness to wake up every day with joy to serve God in whatever way we can. This issue is all about our work with mothers, which if you've learned anything about our upcoming strategic plan, and I see some of our board members, so thank you too for being here, board members. Vision 2030, a critically important part of that vision is mothers. And so we are really lifting up our ministries with mothers in this. And on page 11, there's this beautiful chart that just is our ecosystem of how we support mothers at Catholic Charities. And there's some beautiful stories. So I really encourage you to be lifted up with hope and joy about the work that the Catholic Church is doing on behalf of mothers. And I thank so many of you who would have given to the recent second collection. And if you haven't, it's not too late. So please, such a special time for Catholic Charities and in the life of the Church. The other thing that's in front of you is an image of Mary, undoer of knots, and it's got a short little writing from myself. And the reason I include this is, first of all, now that I'm a Catholic, you got to have these cards that you give out with saints on them, right? But second and more importantly, some of you know my story. Mary has been very important to my road to the Catholic faith, and I have to tell you, over the last 6 months, about 6 months ago, about 4 different people, including Father Ken Simpson, who's here, and Chip Mullaney and 2 others said, Sally, have you ever prayed to Mary, undoer of knots? So when 4 people tell you this, you're supposed to go pray to Mary, undoer of knots. And that new showing of Mary has become transformative to me. And again, when you're raised as a prominent Protestant, you're going, like, how many different showings of Mary do we need? But what we learn is that each one of them has a new part of wisdom that God's trying to impart on us, a new part of understanding about the human condition and about how the communion of saints, and Mary in particular, is here to transform our experience and transform our souls. And in praying with her, she was originally known for her work in the 1800s of a German whose marriage was falling apart. And he prayed to Mary, undoer of knots, to save his marriage. And it's a frequently mentioned story on the internet. And as I've prayed with her, I began to understand that what she was undoing, what she undoes in marriages and in sibling relationships and in neighbors that have gone awry, whenever humans are in relationship, over time, we get a little dinky. We add just kind of goo and misunderstanding. And I know husbands and wives, there's never a time when your spouse opens your mouth and you just shut your ears, because here we go again, right? And it's that moment when we stop listening to the other. And it is part of human sin. And that is why Mary is here to say, I will help you undo those knots, because she loves human love. Right? She was given the ultimate human love of Mary loving Jesus in human form. And I've come to understand if she loves human relationships, she especially understands the dysfunction that comes into organizations, which are networks of human relationships. And so I have decided she is the patron saint. You didn't know this, Cardinal, but she's the patron saint of organizational change. So I think you've been praying to her also. Because it's just networks of just when relationships get calcified, when detritus, when too many files and systems, and that's the way we always did it. And you have to gently untie them with love and respect. But that's how renewal comes in human relationship, when we have the bravery to confront the residue that's accumulated and to start afresh and start anew. And so that's why I've come to love her. And I can go on and on. But I just place her in your hands for any of your relationships, for any of your organizations, and I think the church right now, and the Pope is very fond of her, if I'm not mistaken, Cardinal. And so I've read from that too. So please she's become our little patron saint at Catholic Charities, and a lot of the hard work that we've done recently in making the decisions. You know, there's a lot of talk about what we did. We have made the decision to exit 75 government contracts, but it's only 12% of our revenue. I feel a need to tell people that. It is 12% of our revenue. We are still very much the largest human services organization in our region. We are one of the largest in the country, and we will continue to be. We are here to help people with food and housing and immediate access, basic needs. We are here when people are in crisis. If you don't know this, of the 40,000 migrants who have come primarily to Chicago from Venezuela, Catholic Charities, in partnership with many different government agencies and many parishes and many orders, has touched the lives of over 28,000 and given long-term housing resettlement, meals, English language. We have done more, the church has done more than any other entity in the Archdiocese of Chicago in Cook and Lake County in ministering to the migrants. And you might say, why aren't we reading about it? It isn't because we aren't telling the story. It's because stories of hope aren't the favorite thing in the press. So please feel hope. Please feel pride in the charitable works of the Catholic Church of Chicago, of which Catholic Charities is one critical element, but part of a whole network. The last piece I've got here, and I won't go through all the charts, but remember, I am a business school professor at heart. That's where sort of I started my life, and I always feel that pictures are a very important part of teaching. And this top chart on this statistics page is one that I actually now show every time I also teach at Kellogg, because I think it is something that we forget or did not know. What this top chart shows you is the last 50 years of income in the United States in 20 percentile groups. So the bottom red line shows you since the late 1960s to the early 2020s, in inflation-adjusted terms, what the income of the bottom 20% of households has looked like. And the gray line, the light gray, is then the bottom, the next 20 to 40%, and the dark gray is the 40 to 60%. And what you see is most of our population has been left behind by the greatest economic expansion in human history. And yes, I know we do transfer payments, and we can have a whole argument with economists of what the real net effect is, but we have created a system in which people can't work and support their families, which about half the population is struggling to do that, despite this incredible time of abundance that is disproportionately landed in the hands of the top 25, and we know the 1% line is almost like this. And I think as people of faith, we're called to keep that in mind. That is why we are called to care. That is why we are called to charity and mercy, because so many of us in this room have been blessed with abundance, and it is holding the discomfort of this truth that we are called to do as Christians, and why we come together in the mission of charity out of gratitude wherever we sit on these charts. The other chart I want to bring to your attention, if we are in Chicago and if we are in Cook and Lake counties, The overall poverty rate is about 12% in the US. The chart here says 12%, but it's sitting at 8%. So that little red line on the bottom, push it up a little. We'll fix that in the next printing. But what I want you to see is in Lake County, the poverty rate's about 8%, so it's below average. Cook County overall is just about average. It's about 12%. But the city of Chicago is at about 17%. It's much higher than average. And the piece that we learned during strategic planning is in Chicago, more so than any large city, we are disproportionately segregated in poverty. If in Chicago, when you look at this chart, if you are white in either Lake County, Cook County, or Lake, versus if you are black, you are 3 times more likely to live in poverty than if you are in white. And this is true in Lake County, this is true in Cook County, and this is true in the city of Chicago. And so the face of need in our city is particularly biased. And it is something that I was reminded of in our strategic planning and that we have to approach with humility and real asking God to help us understand how we are called to particularly address this issue. But let me lift us up. We are people of hope, and we are people who choose to live with the hard knowledge and choose to act. And that's why we're here tonight to talk about how people of faith, we can take Mary of Undoer of Knots and we can say, how do you call us? How do you help us to be part of the solution? Because when you add up what Catholic Charities does, when you add up the orders, when you add up the parishes, we are easily a third to half of the safety net in this region. And I want you to feel proud of that. I want you to feel emboldened by that. And I want us all to say, how do we do even more together with this amazing base that we have? And that's what we're here to talk about. So do not be discouraged. The Holy Spirit is not asleep. We are called to be people of hope, and that is what we're here to talk about tonight. And I am so excited to have both of these guests do it with us. So our first guest, many of you know, Cardinal Blase Cupich is the Archbishop of Chicago, born in Omaha, one of 9 children. We know he has lots of sisters. He's not shy about working with strong women, as you know. He attended the College of St. Thomas and St. Paul. He got a BA in philosophy. He has many degrees from a whole bunch of different places. I think you have at least 2 masters, a licentiate, and a doctorate from the Catholic University of America in sacramental theology, in addition from many other places. He was ordained to the priesthood in 1975. He has been a seminary rector. He has been a college professor. He has taught high school, and he has pastored in parishes, all before he was called to become the bishop of Rapid City, South Dakota in July 1998. And then he was appointed only a few years later in 2010 to Spokane. And then even 4 years later, in 2014, he was called to be Archbishop of Chicago, and then was elevated by Pope Francis to be a cardinal in 2016. The Georgetown professor John Carr has called the cardinal a remarkable example of a Francis bishop before there was a Francis, because of his emphasis on social justice and his concern for the poor. Kerry Robinson, Georgetown, Yale Divinity School. She's an amazing fundraiser. She went to raise $5 million at Yale, and somehow it became $75 million. And it just became this, for anybody who knows about the Yale Catholic ministry, it's just an incredible, incredible legacy that you built in partnership with some wonderful folks. A founding executive director of Leadership Round Table. Many of you know it is an organization of lay people that is here to help the church thrive. And then she was appointed last June, or July, the president and CEO of Catholic Charities USA. One of my favorite quotes was in the Chicago Catholic. She said, treating everyone without exception with a little awe, respect, and even reverence might be just what the church and the world need. So I am delighted to welcome these amazing people into dialogue. Thank you. So Cardinal, we're gonna start with you. And one of the things I love when we're in discussion with people is to really learn a bit about their family roots and their faith. and what brought each of you to such incredible leadership posts. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit, maybe of a little lesser known parts of your story of growing up in Omaha. Where were you in the birth order? And what are some of the experiences as a child that particularly propelled you to the work that you do?
Well, thank you. It's good to be with all of you. I'm really pleased that this is a wonderful crowd of people. So I grew up in a family of 9 children. I was the third. I have 2 older brothers, so we had 3 boys in a row. And then the girls came, and as my brother said, the boys were ahead 3-0, and the girls won 5-4 in the 9th. And my dad was a letter carrier. My mom was a stay-at-home mom who worked to keep the family together. We all went to Catholic school, taught by religious sisters. And it maybe reflects some of the history that you're familiar with in your own families. But a couple of things, my parents really were the ones who inspired us to a life of service and generosity. Of the 9 of us, 5 ended up teaching in some way. But the couple of memories that come to mind are, I remember I was 8 or 9 years old or so, and a man in the parish died suddenly of a heart attack. He had 6 kids, and so somebody from the parish on a Saturday night came by the house. We had just finished our bath, watching TV, and somebody came to the door asking for a donation to help the family. So my mother went to her purse and pulled out $5 and gave it to them, and that was in the 50s, and it was a lot. And I remember her saying, "Well, that's all the money we have until your father gets paid on Monday." And it was that kind of care for another person, that disinterested sense herself in the care for someone who is in need, that really just etched in my memory. So it was along those lines. The other memory about my dad was when he was 48 in 1971, I was studying in Rome, and he came down with Parkinson's. He had to quit his job. And so he worked to get himself back, and he began to do work with St. Vincent de Paul to visit people in their homes and also in the hospitals. And he noticed that some of the people in the area were not eating very well, and so they were starting a new program called Meals on Wheels, a federal government. So he went to the county board and he said to them, we should get involved in this here. The county should participate in this. They didn't want anything to do with federal government bureaucracy. So he decided, you don't get a Croatian mad. And so what he did was he decided he would run for public office. He'd run for the county board against the man in his own party. And he went door to door, talked about Meals on Wheels and what he wanted to do, and he won by 26 votes. He served 3 terms, became the chair of the county board, was instrumental in founding the Eastern Nebraska Office on Aging, and this day, they still have Meals on Wheels. But here was a man who decided that even though he had his own infirmity, he needed to do something for people who were in trouble. So those kinds of things were etched in my memory in terms of my own personal experience of what my parents offered us as examples.
They were really living their faith.
They were, and it was natural to them. It wasn't anything big. They thought it was normal that they should do something like that.
And how, Cardinal, I'm just going to ask one follow-up. How did then your education at St. Thomas and preparing for the priesthood build on that?
Well, it's interesting. My brother was in the seminary too, and so he was older. And so when they approached me, I said, "Well, my brother's in there. It's kind of like those coupons, one per family, So I wasn't too hot on the idea, I was president of the student council. My brother was a bookworm. I was into social things and so on. But then I went and I fell into love with philosophy, And so God called me by my mind, first of all, before my heart, I think. And then I went and studied in Rome, and it just came that way. So it was a mixture of things, but the time at St. Thomas was important because it helped me develop my mind. My heart was always in it, but my mind wasn't.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Kerry, you grew up in a big family. Why don't you share some about how your Catholic family shaped your journey, and then I'll do a follow-up on sort of how college and divinity school might have continued that journey as well.
Great, yes. So I also come from a large family. I am a part of a family that now has an 80-year history of serving the Catholic Church at the local, national, and international level through the instrument of a private family foundation. So 80 years ago, my great-grandparents, Helena and John Raskob, pooled their resources and they set up a family foundation. They had two intentions. The first was that all of the money would be used exclusively to support the Catholic Church, but they left that intentionally broad. The money can go to anything the Catholic Church is interested in anywhere in the world, so that hardly limits it. Their second intention was that their children and their descendants would be invited as teenagers to serve as volunteers in the work of the foundation. So from the youngest age I can remember, I was exposed to the Catholic Church not solely through the lens of my parish or parochial school, but in this rich diversity of ministries and apostolates all over the world. And I fell in love with the church because of women and men, ordained religious and lay, who dared to stand witness to human suffering. They bore witness to the worst of what humankind can do to one another and to our common home, and yet their faith compelled them to alleviate that human suffering, to educate, to sow seeds of peace, to advocate, to provide humanitarian care, and to uphold human dignity. And as a child, I was just so impressed that while they saw real human suffering, they appeared to me to be entirely free interiorly, and they had this palpable sense of joy about them. And I just remember as a child wanting to be like these moral heroes. It's exactly what I see in Catholic Charities. It's the frontline workers who are responding when people are experiencing some of their hardest days. And Catholic Charities responds with so much mercy and tenderness, not just pragmatic care.
The people on the front lines who've been there for decades, and you just go and it's effortless for them. And they have chosen to be there. They have chosen this is their vocation. It's quite profound. One of my favorite I like to talk about, and she's in here, is Velma, who does the South Side pregnancy work and Roseland and things. And she has been with us for decades, and she is a woman of deep, deep faith, and you just feel holiness in her presence. So I know, it's exactly what we see at Catholic Charities. There's a really wonderful story. You wrote this great book, Imagining Abundance, that came largely out of the early work you did at Yale. But there's a wonderful story that you tell about Mother Teresa in that book as you start that book out, and I wonder if you'd be willing to tell that story.
Yes,
tonight.
so I truly believe that generosity is humankind's birthright, that we're all called to be generous and to serve as catalysts to inspire generosity in others. And this story, which is attributed to Mother Teresa, takes place in a rural, very poor part of India. Mother Teresa is being shadowed by a novice, and on this particular occasion, buckets of rice are being distributed, and there is enough for 1 bucket of rice per family. So there's a long line, and each member of one member of a family approaches, and Mother Teresa fills the bucket with rice, thanks Mother Teresa, and they go on. Well, presently, an elderly woman has 2 buckets, And when she reaches Mother Teresa fills one of the buckets. And the novice is confused by the fact that Mother Teresa isn't filling both buckets. The elderly woman gets out of line and she pours half of the full bucket into the second empty bucket. And the novice says, Mother Teresa, why aren't we filling both buckets? And Mother Teresa somewhat exasperatedly says, well, this elderly woman is here to get enough rice for her family, and she is also here on behalf of her neighbors. Everyone is sick in her neighbor's household, so she has their bucket, and she is taking this to them. And the novice says, well, then all the more reason we should fill up both buckets. And Mother Teresa says she can't carry both buckets at full capacity. And then the novice says, well, that's ridiculous. We should fill up both buckets and we should take it to the neighbor's house for her. And finally, Mother Teresa turns to the novice and says, these are among the poorest people you will ever encounter. Never take away the right for someone to be generous. When I heard that story, I thought, how dare I be stingy? It is such a luxury to be generous, and the poor have often taught me how to be generous.
I'm going to do one more Mother Teresa, because you have a great Mother Teresa. Because when we think of generosity and we think of endless giving, right, it's hard to imagine her example. You have a very simple example of when you met her in Washington.
Well, during the 1980s, really during the Reagan administration, I was in Washington working at the Vatican Embassy. I was just 30 years old, a young secretary. And so I was the youngest guy in the totem pole. So Mother Teresa was a good friend of the nuncio at that time, Cardinal who worked in India and when she was there. So when she came to town, she came to visit him, and then she wanted to go around to visit other places. And he told me, he said, you're going to drive her. So I drove Mother Teresa every time she came to Washington. Well, I had to keep her on schedule because she was always late from one thing to another, and she was always late because people wanted to take more pictures with her. And so I said to her, you're 15 minutes late for your next one. We should go. She said, no, we have to finish the photos. Okay. So we get in the car, and I said, well, Mother, you really like to take photos, don't you? Oh, she said, I hate it. I said, then why do you do it? She said, because I made a deal with God. For every photo somebody takes, he has to let somebody out of purgatory. So, I mean, her generosity was so deep, she could leverage God.
And bargain, yeah.